The streets of Ouagadougou were silent that night, but it wasn't the kind of peace that made people sleep easy. It was the kind that came before a storm. In the heart of Burkina Faso, something was about to happen that would shake the nation, not just because of what was done, but because of who dared to do it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young president many had begun calling the new Sankara, was about to face one of the biggest betrayals of his leadership. But this time, the traitors were not foreign diplomats or outside governments. They were men who once saluted him, shared meals with him, stood guard at his side, soldiers, his own. Just months earlier, Ibrahim Traoré had risen to power on a wave of hope. Young, bold, and unafraid, he had become a symbol of change, someone who rejected foreign influence and vowed to put Burkina Faso's future back in the hands of its people. He spoke like a revolutionary, walked among the people like one of them, and made decisions that echoed far beyond his borders. France was told to leave. Western mining companies were pushed out. Resources were reclaimed. The youth celebrated. The streets lit up with music and color. But behind the applause in quiet corners of military barracks, whispers had begun to grow. Some called him too bold, too dangerous, not for the people, but for those who once benefited from the old system, men who had become rich by keeping their heads down and their hands open, foreign agents who had built networks of influence over decades, and soldiers, trusted ones, who saw in Traoré's rise not a mission, but a threat to their position. So they began to plan, not loudly, not carelessly. This was a different kind of coup, the kind planned in silence with coded messages and late-night meetings, the kind where betrayal didn't wear a mask, it wore a uniform. But what they didn't know was this. Traoré was watching. He had built a new kind of intelligence team, loyal, young, rooted in the soil of Burkina Faso, not in the wallets of outsiders. These agents were not interested in foreign salaries or quiet promotions. They were children of the revolution, raised on the words of Thomas Sankara, determined to protect what was finally theirs. For weeks they listened. They followed. They waited. And slowly the picture became clear, a plan to strike during Traoré's next visit to the north, an ambush disguised as a terrorist attack, a blame game ready to be played on national TV. The goal? Remove the president, claim emergency control, and open the doors once again to those who had been kicked out. But Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. Instead, he let the plan grow. Let the traitors think they were ahead, and just hours before the strike, he moved. In a sweeping operation that spread across the capital like a rising tide, soldiers loyal to Traoré locked down key checkpoints, surrounded targeted barracks, and uncovered weapons hidden behind walls and under beds. The traitors didn't even have time to run. Some were caught with large amounts of foreign cash in their bags. Others had phones full of encrypted messages traced back to suspicious numbers. And one had something even more telling, a foreign-made radio device, tuned to a secure channel no one in Burkina Faso had access to, unless they were speaking to someone far outside its borders. The city woke up the next morning to news they couldn't believe. A coup attempt had been crushed before it could begin. Not by luck, but by careful planning and absolute loyalty. And then came something no one expected. Something that would leave a mark in the hearts of Burkinabe forever. The captured traitors were brought out, not hidden behind curtains or quietly discharged. They were paraded, not to humiliate them but to show the people the truth. These were not just any soldiers. They were decorated officers, familiar faces, men who had smiled in public but plotted in private. And standing before them, calm and silent, was President Ibrahim Traoré. No script, no suit, just a soldier among his people. He didn't need to say much. His presence said everything. But when he spoke, every word felt like it was written on stone. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He pointed to the kneeling men and said, "These are not patriots. They are not heroes. They are traitors." The crowd didn't just cheer. They felt something deeper. A mixture of pain, anger, and pride. Because this was not just about politics anymore. This was about dignity. As the sun rose higher and the dust in the streets settled, one question lingered in the air. Who was really behind the coup attempt? The captured soldiers had been silent. Most of them refused to talk. But one of them broke. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They promised us protection, visas, safety if it failed." But it didn't just fail. It collapsed. That sentence was enough to shake the ground again. It wasn't just an internal betrayal. It was something much bigger and much deeper. A game played from afar. And that's where this story truly begins. Because what happened next wasn't just about arrests or speeches. It was about uncovering a network, following the money, tracing calls, finding out exactly who promised what, and why they were so afraid of a young man standing up for his country. Traore knew this wasn't over, and neither should we, because what comes next will reveal far more than anyone imagined. The whispers had already started spreading across Ouagadougou like wildfire. The coup had failed, but its roots were deeper than anyone first believed. Traore's intelligence team began going through every phone, every encrypted file, every piece of cash that was found with the captured soldiers. And what they discovered was far more dangerous than a simple power grab. This wasn't just ambition. It was something much bigger. There were signals, coded words, bank transfers, and messages written in French and English, but not the way local soldiers speak. They were polished, structured, the kind of language used by trained agents. This wasn't local. The most telling clue was an email string found on a hidden device. It didn't name names, but the tone said everything. Words like transition facilitation, asset activation, and post-operation stabilization gave away the truth. Whoever was behind this wasn't trying to rule. They were trying to control, from a distance. The deeper Traore's team dug, the clearer it became. This plot was connected to external forces, not random actors, but people with influence, money, and reach. One captured officer had over $50,000 hidden in foreign bills, crisp, untouched. Another had been in contact with someone claiming to be from a humanitarian organization, but the number was traced back to an address inside a foreign embassy. These weren't small-time operatives. These were carefully selected individuals, picked not just for loyalty, but for silence. The promise was clear: bring down Traore, and in return, gain protection, wealth, and power in the new order. While all this was happening behind closed doors. The streets were filled with questions. People wanted to know who had betrayed them. Not just the soldiers, but the ones behind them. Some thought maybe it was just an internal fight. Others weren't so sure. The idea that foreign actors were once again interfering in Burkina Faso's politics wasn't new. It had happened before. But now it was personal. This wasn't a colonial-era history lesson. It was real, current, and unfolding in front of their eyes. Traore himself remained mostly silent during the early days after the arrests. He didn't give interviews, no long statements, just a few quiet visits to military sites, brief appearances at public ceremonies. But the silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Behind the scenes he was working, with his closest advisors, with intelligence officers, with trusted commanders. They were not only securing the country's borders, they were preparing for what might come next. And something was coming. As Burkina Faso's government made moves to release some of the evidence to the public, heavily redacted, but enough to stir conversation, reactions started pouring in. Some international outlets began questioning Traore's leadership style, calling him authoritarian. Others spoke of democratic backsliding, conveniently ignoring that the coup plot involved illegal foreign funds and betrayal at the highest level. The narrative was shifting, but Traore refused to play defense. In quiet meetings, he spoke directly to the young officers who remained loyal. Many had been trained abroad. Many had family connections to places far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. He looked them in the eyes and asked one question: Who do you serve? Them or us? Most didn't answer with words. They didn't need to. Their silence, their salutes, their willingness to stand watch when no one else would, that said enough. But even as the internal circle tightened, there was one man who had gone quiet. Lieutenant Suleiman, one of Traore's earliest allies, had vanished the same night the arrests were made. Some said he was on a mission. Others feared the worst. He was known for being discreet, smart, and deeply loyal, or so everyone thought. Traore had trusted him with sensitive tasks, including overseeing key operations in the north. But now, no one had seen him in over a week. Then came a whisper from the border, a message relayed through a farmer near the northern region. Someone had crossed into Mali, carrying forged papers, traveling alone, using military language only insiders would recognize. The suspicion grew quickly. Was Suleiman the missing piece? Had he switched sides, or was he on a secret mission of his own? Traore stared at the line, heart pounding. Was it real? Or a trap? Only one thing was certain. Everything was not over. Not yet. And as night once again wrapped around the city of Ouagadougou, the president stood at his window watching the lights flicker across rooftops, knowing that somewhere out there the real enemy was still moving. And the next move would decide everything. The night before the operation, the air in Ouagadougou was unusually still. Even the wind seemed to pause as if holding its breath. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't sleep. He stayed in the operations room with his intelligence team, reviewing every detail Suleiman had shared. The location was verified. A small, quiet facility near the northern hills that didn't appear on any official maps. It had been repurposed, hidden under the cover of a transport company. What they found out next changed everything. Inside that remote building, another coup cell had been operating in silence. This wasn't a leftover piece from the failed attempt. It was a second group quietly preparing a more precise strike. And the worst part? They weren't waiting to capture power. Their goal was simple: remove Traoré permanently and install a temporary military council that would reopen talks with the West. Contracts, mining rights, and military cooperation would all return within days. They had already prepared the documents. That night, Traoré gave the order. His most trusted units moved quietly toward the compound. No fanfare, no announcement, just boots on the ground and eyes fixed on the mission. At 3:17 a.m., the radios came alive, target secured, files recovered, suspects in custody, and there, in a locked back room, was Suleiman. Wounded, weak, but alive. He had stayed to confirm the last names, the final message, the final proof of who had been giving the orders from abroad. His loyalty had nearly cost him his life, but it had saved the country. The next morning, President Traoré addressed the nation, but this time he didn't speak from a balcony or a stage. He stood in a small public square surrounded by ordinary people, farmers, students, vendors, soldiers. No teleprompter, no script, just a man with a voice. He spoke slowly, clearly. He told the people what had happened, not just the coup attempt, but the second cell, the foreign hands, the plans to sell their future. He didn't name the outside countries directly. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. He said, they tried to take our land. Not with bombs. With silence, with influence, with promises that come in envelopes and briefcases. But we are not for sale. Not our land, not our children, not our dreams. The crowd was silent for a moment, the weight of truth settling over them, and then came the sound. Slow claps, then cheers, then voices shouting his name over and over again. This wasn't just support, it was something deeper. Trust. In the days that followed, Burkina Faso didn't just return to normal. It started something new. Reforms were announced. A full audit of military and government positions was launched. Anyone found to be working with foreign entities without clearance would be removed. And for the first time in the country's history, a public education program was introduced. Not just about colonial history, but about modern foreign interference. how it works, how to spot it, and how to fight it with knowledge. Soleiman recovered, and when he was strong enough, he stood beside Traore once again, not as a shadow but as a symbol of redemption. His story was told across radio, TV, and social media. The man who almost vanished had returned not only to protect his president, but to prove that loyalty is not about being perfect. It's about showing up when it matters most. For the world watching from outside, reactions were mixed. Some governments issued cautious statements, others stayed silent. But the people of Burkina Faso didn't wait for approval. They had found their voice, and their leader had shown them what it meant to stand firm, even when the ground shakes beneath you. Ibrahim Traoré had survived an attempt to break the country from within, not with violence, but with patience, truth, and courage. His quiet strength had turned a moment of fear into a defining chapter of national pride. And as the sun set on that long week, the message was clear, not just to Burkina Faso, but to every nation still trying to find its own path. They came with bribes, they came with offers, they came with threats. But in the end, they were met by something they couldn't understand, a people who refused to kneel. And that is the story of how traitors were captured, exposed, and paraded not to humiliate, but to remind everyone watching. The future of Africa will be written by those who love her the most. Please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our awesome content. We've got some fantastic videos lined up for you this week, so make sure to like and share this video with your friends and family. And don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts and suggestions. Thank you so much for your support, and we can't wait to see you in our next video. Until then, stay awesome and keep spreading the positivity.